"I do," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of joy and trepidation. The words echoed through the small chapel, sealing my fate in ways I couldn't have imagined. Joe beamed at me, his dark eyes twinkling with love and promise. As we turned to face our small gathering of family and friends, I caught sight of my new mother-in-law, Brenda. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Hartley," the officiant announced. The room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. My mind was racing, replaying the whirlwind romance that had led to this moment. Just 6 months ago, I was drowning in grief after losing my mother. Now, here I was, starting a new chapter of my life. As we made our way down the aisle, Joe squeezed my hand. "You okay, Lily?" he whispered. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just overwhelmed," I replied. The reception was a blur of congratulations and champagne toasts. I found myself constantly searching the crowd for Brenda, feeling an inexplicable need to keep her in my sights. "Lily, darling." Brenda's saccharine voice cut through the chatter. She glided towards us, arms outstretched. "Welcome to the family, dear." Her embrace was stiff, her perfume cloying. As she pulled away, she gripped my shoulders, her manicured nails digging in slightly. "We're going to be so close, you and I, like mother and daughter." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Joe, oblivious to the tension, wrapped an arm around his mother. "Isn't this great, Mom? I couldn't be happier." Brenda's eyes never left mine. "Oh yes, it's just wonderful." The rest of the evening passed in a haze. As we prepared to leave for our honeymoon, Brenda cornered me near the coat check. "Lily, dear," she began, her voice low, "I hate to bring this up on your special day, but I've been so worried lately." I frowned, concern creeping in. "What's wrong, Brenda?" She sighed dramatically. "It's just, the house feels so empty since Joe moved out. I'm not as young as I used to be, you know." The thought of living alone? My heart sank as I realized where this was going. Before I could respond, Joe appeared at my side. "Ready to go, Mrs. Hartley?" he asked, grinning. I nodded, grateful for the interruption. As we walked away, I glanced back to see Brenda watching us, a calculating look in her eyes. 2 weeks later, we returned from our honeymoon to find Brenda waiting on our doorstep, suitcases in tow. "Surprise!" she exclaimed, rushing to embrace Joe. "I've decided to take you up on your offer to stay for a while." Joe looked bewildered. "Offer? Mom, what are you talking about?" Brenda's lower lip trembled. "Oh, Joey, don't you remember? We discussed it at the wedding. You said I should come stay with you and Lily if I was feeling lonely." I watched in horror as Joe's face softened. "Of course. Mom, I'm sorry, I must have forgotten. Right, Lily? We did discuss this, didn't we?" Trapped, I nodded weakly. "Yes, of course. Welcome, Brenda." As we helped her move her belongings inside, I caught Brenda smirking at me when Joe wasn't looking. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the battle I was about to face. That night, as Joe slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. How had my fresh start turned into this? I was a doctor, for heaven's sake. I saved lives every day. Surely, I could handle one meddling mother-in-law. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would test every ounce of my strength and patience. The shrill beeping of my alarm jolted me awake. I groaned, reaching for my phone to silence it. 4:30 a.m. Another early shift at the ER. As I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Joe, I caught a whiff of something burning. Panic surged through me as I rushed downstairs, only to find Brenda in the kitchen, surrounded by smoke. "Oh, good morning, dear," she chirped, waving a dishcloth at the smoking toaster. "I thought I'd make you breakfast before your shift." I forced a smile, my heart still racing. "That's thoughtful, Brenda, but I really need to get ready." Her face fell. "But I went to all this trouble. The least you could do is sit down and eat." Guilt gnawed at me as I glanced at the clock. "I'm sorry, I just don't have time." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "I see. Well, don't let me keep you from your important work." The drive to the hospital was tense, my mind replaying Brenda's words. By the time I arrived, I was already exhausted. "Rough night, Dr. Hartley?" my colleague Sarah asked as I entered the ER. I sighed. "You have no idea." The shift was brutal. A multi-car pileup had us working nonstop for hours. As I was finishing up with a patient, my phone buzzed. A text from Joe. "Mom says you left without eating. Everything okay?" I bit back a groan. Before I could respond, Sarah called out, "Lily, we need you. Cardiac arrest coming in." By the time I got home, I was dead on my feet. The house was spotless, and the aroma of a home-cooked meal filled the air. "Welcome home, honey," Joe greeted me with a kiss. "Mom made dinner. Isn't she amazing?" Brenda appeared, all smiles. "I hope you're hungry, Lily. I've been cooking all day." I plastered on a smile. "It smells wonderful. Thank you, Brenda." As we sat down to eat, Brenda dominated the conversation, regaling Joe with tales of her day. I pushed my food around, too tired to eat. "Lily, dear," Brenda's voice cut through my haze. "Don't you like the food? I made it especially for you." "It's delicious," I lied. "I'm just tired." Joe frowned. "Maybe you're working too hard, honey. Mom was saying earlier that she's worried about you." I looked up, startled. "She was?" Brenda nodded, her eyes wide with feigned concern. "Of course, dear. I told Joey how you rushed out this morning without eating. It's not healthy." "I had an early shift," I started to explain, but Brenda cut me off. "And you're always so tired when you get home. It's not fair to Joey, is it? He needs a wife, not a zombie." Joe shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I'm sure Lily's doing her best." "Of course she is." Brenda patted his hand. I just worry, that's all. Maybe if she cut back her hours." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going to bed. Good night." As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard Joe and Brenda's muffled voices downstairs. My stomach churned with anxiety. How had I become the bad guy in my own home? The next morning, I woke to find a note from Joe. "Had to leave early for a meeting. Mom's making breakfast. Love you." I steeled myself before heading downstairs. Brenda was at the stove, humming cheerfully. "Good morning, Lily," she said without turning around. "I hope you slept well. I was just telling Joey how worried I am about you." I gritted my teeth. "Brenda, we need to talk." She turned, her face a mask of innocence. "Of course, dear. What about?" As I opened my mouth to speak, my phone rang. The hospital. Another emergency. Brenda's lips curved into a smirk. "Duty calls, I suppose. We'll talk later, dear. Have a good day at work." As I rushed out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control of my life, one day at a time. The ER doors burst open as paramedics rushed in with a critical patient. "Female, mid-60s, possible heart attack," one shouted. My heart nearly stopped. The woman on the gurney was Brenda. "Lily," she gasped, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry." I pushed my emotions aside and snapped into doctor mode. "Get her to Bay 3 stat!" Hours later, I slumped against the wall outside Brenda's room, exhausted. We'd stabilized her, but it had been touch and go. Joe appeared, his face pale with worry. "How is she?" "She's stable," I assured him, "but she'll need to stay for observation." He hugged me tightly. "Thank God you were here. I don't know what I'd do without either of you." Guilt gnawed at me. Despite everything, I'd saved Brenda's life. But as I watched Joe fuss over his mother, I couldn't help but wonder, would she see this as a peace offering or another reason to resent me? The next few days were a whirlwind. I juggled my shifts with visiting Brenda, all while trying to keep our home running smoothly. Joe was a constant presence at his mother's bedside, leaving me to handle everything else. On the day of Brenda's discharge, I arrived at the hospital to find her holding court with a group of nurses. "Oh, Lily dear," she cooed as I entered. "I was just telling these lovely ladies how fortunate I am to have such a dedicated daughter-in-law. She's been working herself to the bone, hasn't she?" The nurses nodded sympathetically, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this experience had changed things between us. That hope was short-lived. As soon as we got home, Brenda's sweet facade crumbled. "Well, I suppose I should be grateful you didn't let me die," she sniffed. "Though it would have been nice if you'd visited more. Poor Joey was so worried." I bit my tongue, reminding myself she was still recovering. "I'm sorry, Brenda. I was trying to keep things running smoothly here." She waved dismissively. Yes, always so busy with your important job. Speaking of which, don't you think it's time you took a break? After all, I'll need someone to look after me while I recover." My jaw dropped. "Brenda, I can't just quit my job." "Why not?" she challenged. "Joey makes enough to support us all. And really, Lily, what kind of wife puts her career before her family?" Before I could respond, Joe walked in. "Everything okay in here?" Brenda's eyes instantly filled with tears. "Oh, Joey, I was just telling Lily how overwhelmed I feel. The doctor said I need constant care, and with Lily working such long hours." Joe frowned, turning to me. "Honey, maybe you should take some time off, just until Mom's back on her feet." I stared at him, disbelieving. "Joe, I can't just—" "Please, Lily," he pleaded. For me, for us. I felt the walls closing in. My career, my independence, everything I'd worked for was slipping away. That night, I tossed and turned, Joe's words echoing in my head. By morning, I'd made my decision. With shaking hands, I dialed the hospital. Dr. Reeves? It's Lily Hartley. I need to take a leave of absence. As I hung up, I caught sight of Brenda in the doorway, a triumphant smile on her face. Oh, Lily, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I'm so glad you're finally putting family first. Now be a dear and fetch my breakfast, won't you? I'm feeling a bit weak this morning. As I trudged downstairs, the reality of my situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd saved Brenda's life, only to become a prisoner in my own home. How had it come to this? And more importantly, how was I going to survive it? The days blurred together in a haze of endless chores and Brenda's constant demands. I'd gone from saving lives to folding laundry and preparing meals that were never quite good enough for my mother-in-law's discerning palate. Lily, dear, Brenda's shrill voice pierced through my thoughts. Be a lamb and fetch my reading glasses. I seem to have misplaced them again. I bit back a sigh, forcing a smile. Of course, Brenda. I'll look for them right away. As I searched the house, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, pale, tired, with dark circles under her eyes. What had happened to the confident doctor I used to be? Lily, Brenda called again, impatience lacing her tone. What's taking so long? I found the glasses perched on top of her head and wordlessly handed them to her. She sniffed. Really, Lily? You'd think a doctor would be more observant. Oh, wait. You're not a doctor anymore, are you? The word stung, but I swallowed my retort. Joe would be home soon, and I couldn't bear another argument. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, Brenda launched into her usual critique of my cooking. The chicken's a bit dry, don't you think, Joey? And these vegetables are terribly overcooked. Joe, engrossed in his phone, merely grunted in response. You know, Brenda continued, I was thinking, now that Lily's not working, perhaps we should consider redecorating. This house could use a woman's touch. I nearly choked on my water. Excuse me? Brenda waved her hand dismissively. Oh, don't worry, dear. I'll handle everything. After all, I have much more experience in these matters. This is our home, Brenda, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. Joe and I like it the way it is. She turned to Joe, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. Joey, don't you think the house could use some sprucing up? Your father and I always kept our home so lovely. Joe finally looked up from his phone. Yeah, sure. Whatever you think, Mom. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. Outside, I gulped in the cool night air, trying to calm my racing heart. How had I let things get this far? I was a prisoner in my own home, my identity slowly being erased by Brenda's constant manipulations. As I paced the backyard, a memory surfaced. My mother's voice, strong and clear. Never let anyone dim your light, Lily. You're meant to shine. Tears pricked my eyes. What would my mom think if she could see me now? The back door creaked open, and Joe stepped out. Lily? You okay? I turned to face him, suddenly angry. No, Joe. I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time. He frowned. What are you talking about? Your mother, Joe. The way she treats me, the way she's taken over our lives. I can't do this anymore. Joe's face hardened. Come on, Lily. Mom's just trying to help. You're being oversensitive. Oversensitive? I laughed bitterly. I gave up my career, my independence, everything for you and your mother. And you can't even see what's happening. What's happening is that you're acting ungrateful, Joe snapped. Mom's done nothing but try to make our lives easier? I stared at him, realizing with a sinking heart that I was truly alone in this battle. You're right, Joe. I am ungrateful. Ungrateful that I married a man who can't see his wife drowning right in front of him. With that, I stormed past him into the house, ignoring Brenda's inquiring looks. In our bedroom, I pulled out a suitcase and began throwing clothes into it. As I zipped it shut, I caught sight of my medical ID badge lying forgotten on the dresser. I picked it up, running my thumb over my name and title. Dr. Lily Hartley, Emergency Medicine. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't change Brenda, and I couldn't make Joe see the truth. But I could change myself. It was time to reclaim my life, whatever the cost. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by a whirlwind of activity, my hands raw from scrubbing and chopping. Brenda's voice rang out from the living room where she sat directing operations like a general. Lily, dear, don't forget the petit fours need to be arranged just so, and make sure the champagne is properly chilled. I gritted my teeth, fighting back the urge to scream. Brenda's grand party had consumed our lives for weeks. My suitcase, packed in a moment of desperation, still sat hidden in our closet. I hadn't been able to bring myself to leave, not yet. Joe breezed into the kitchen, adjusting his tie. Wow, honey, everything looks great. Mom's really outdone herself this time, hasn't she? I froze, the knife in my hand trembling slightly. Joe, I've been cooking and cleaning for days. Your mother hasn't lifted a finger. He frowned, confusion clouding his features. But Mom said she's been working tirelessly on this party. She even mentioned how you've been struggling to keep up. Before I could respond, Brenda swept into the room, resplendent in a glittering gown. Joey, darling, don't you look handsome? Lily, why aren't you dressed yet? The guests will be arriving any minute. I looked down at my flour-stained apron and disheveled appearance. I've been busy preparing everything, Brenda. I haven't had time to... Tsk, tsk, Brenda interrupted, shaking her head. Really, Lily, I expected better from you. This party is so important to me. Couldn't you have made more of an effort? Joe shifted uncomfortably. Mom, maybe you're being a little harsh. Lily's been working hard. Brenda's eyes welled with tears. Oh, Joey, I'm just so disappointed. I wanted everything to be perfect. After all I've been through, is that too much to ask? As Joe moved to comfort his mother, the doorbell rang. Guests had begun to arrive. Lily, go make yourself presentable, Brenda ordered, her tone brooking no argument. And do hurry. The next few hours were a blur of forced smiles and polite small talk. I circulated the room, refilling glasses and passing hors d'oeuvres, all while Brenda held court, regaling her friends with tales of her recovery and how she'd single-handedly planned this magnificent soiree. And of course, I couldn't have done it without my dear daughter-in-law, Brenda announced, beckoning me over. Lily, darling, come here and tell everyone how much you've enjoyed helping me. All eyes turned to me, expectant. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back as I struggled to find words. I'm always happy to help family, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Brenda's smile tightened. Oh, come now, Lily. Don't be modest. Tell them about all the wonderful ideas you contributed. Oh, wait, she paused, her eyes glittering maliciously. I forgot. You didn't contribute any ideas, did you? You were too busy moping about your lost career to be of any real help. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Joe, standing nearby, looked stricken. Mom, what are you saying? Brenda turned to him, her face a mask of innocence. Oh, Joey, I'm just trying to help Lily come out of her shell. She's been so withdrawn lately. I worry about her, you know. I stood there, humiliation burning through me, as Brenda continued to twist the knife. The room began to spin, voices blurring into a cacophony of whispers and judgmental stares. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I wouldn't take this anymore. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the room, ignoring the startled exclamations behind me. I climbed the stairs, my legs shaking, and entered our bedroom. The suitcase was still there, waiting. As I reached for it, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, beaten down, hollow-eyed, a shadow of her former self. But in her eyes, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in months: determination. I grabbed the suitcase and my car keys. It was time to reclaim my life, my identity. As I descended the stairs, I could hear Brenda's voice, still holding court in the living room. Joe appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. Lily, what are you doing? I met his gaze steadily. I'm leaving, Joe. I can't do this anymore. As I walked past him towards the door, I realized that this wasn't just about escaping Brenda's tyranny. It was about finding myself again, the strong, capable woman I used to be. And for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I stood at the front door, my hand on the knob, ready to walk out on everything I'd known for the past year. Joe's voice, tinged with panic, cut through my resolve. Lily, please, don't do this. We can talk about it. I turned to face him, my voice steady. There's nothing left to say, Joe. I can't live like this anymore. Just as I opened the door, a commotion from the living room caught our attention. A woman's voice, filled with excitement, rose above the murmur of the party. It's her! It's really her! Curiosity overrode my desire to flee. I followed Joe back to the party, where we found a silver-haired woman pointing at me, her eyes wide with recognition. "You're Dr. Hartley, aren't you? The one who saved my life at Rosie's Cafe last year." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. I recognized the woman now, Abigail Thompson, the patient I'd resuscitated during my lunch break months ago. Yes, that's me," I stammered, caught off guard by this unexpected turn of events. Abigail rushed forward, grasping my hands. "I've been trying to find you for months to thank you properly. You disappeared from the hospital before I could." Brenda, looking flustered, tried to interject. "Now, Abigail, dear, this is hardly the time." But Abigail was unstoppable. She turned to the crowd, her voice ringing with emotion. "This woman is a hero. She performed CPR on me when I had a heart attack, kept me alive until the ambulance arrived. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for her quick thinking and skill." The room erupted in applause and exclamations of admiration. I stood there, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in attention. Joe looked at me with a mixture of pride and confusion. Abigail continued, "But wait, I don't understand. Brenda told us you were just a housewife. Why aren't you practicing medicine anymore?" The room fell silent once again. I could feel Brenda's glare burning into me, daring me to speak the truth. In that moment, something inside me broke free. The months of suppressed anger, frustration, and pain came pouring out. "I gave up my career because of Brenda," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "She manipulated her way into our home, made me feel worthless, and slowly stripped away everything that made me who I am." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Joe's face paled as he looked between me and his mother. Brenda, her face contorted with rage, stepped forward. "How dare you? After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me, by humiliating me in front of my friends." Abigail, sensing the tension, placed a protective hand on my arm. "Brenda, what's going on here? What have you done to this poor girl?" As Brenda sputtered and tried to defend herself, more guests began to speak up. They shared stories of how Brenda had spoken ill of me behind my back, painting me as lazy and incompetent. Joe, looking shell-shocked, finally found his voice. "Mom, is this true? Have you been lying to us all this time?" Brenda's facade crumbled. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally and finding none. In a last-ditch effort, she turned to me, her voice dripping with venom. "You ungrateful little witch. I welcomed you into this family, and this is how you repay me? By turning everyone against me?" The room collectively recoiled at her outburst. Joe stepped between us, his face a mask of disbelief and disappointment. "That's enough, Mom. I think you should leave." As Brenda was escorted out, her protests fading into the night, I stood there, trembling. The truth was finally out, but at what cost? Abigail squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You're not alone, Dr. Hartley. We're all here for you." I looked around the room, seeing sympathy and support in the faces of Brenda's former friends. Joe approached me, his eyes filled with remorse. "Lily, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Can we talk? Please." As the party disintegrated around us, I faced the biggest decision of my life. Could I forgive Joe for his blindness? Could we rebuild what Brenda had so systematically destroyed? Or was it too late to salvage the pieces of my shattered life? The aftermath of Brenda's party left our house in eerie silence. Joe and I sat at opposite ends of the couch, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy between us. Abigail had insisted on staying, her presence a comforting buffer. "I think," Abigail began softly, "that we need to get the whole story out in the open. Joe, Lily's been through hell, and you need to hear it all." Joe nodded, his face ashen. "Please, Lily, I need to understand." Taking a deep breath, I started from the beginning. The words poured out of me like a flood. Brenda's manipulation, the constant criticism, the isolation. With each revelation, Joe's face crumpled further, disbelief giving way to horror. "I had no idea," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Before I could answer, the front door burst open. Cliff, Joe's father, stormed in, his face thunderous. "What in God's name is going on here?" he demanded. "Brenda called me in hysterics, saying you've turned the whole town against her." Abigail stood, her small frame radiating strength. "Cliff, sit down. There's a lot you need to hear." For the next hour, Abigail and I laid out the entire sordid tale. Cliff's anger slowly morphed into shock, then shame. "I knew Brenda could be difficult," he mumbled, "but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." Just as we finished, the door opened again. Brenda swept in, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "Well, I hope you're all happy," she spat. "My reputation is in tatters, thanks to you ungrateful." "That's enough, Brenda," Cliff cut her off, his voice steely. "I've heard everything. How could you do this to our family? To Lily?" Brenda's face contorted with rage. "How could I? How could she? She stole my son, turned him against me. I was just trying to protect our family." "By destroying mine," I shot back, years of pent-up anger finally breaking free. "You made my life a living hell, Brenda. You took everything from me, my career, my confidence, nearly my marriage." Joe stood, placing himself between Brenda and me. "Mom, I think you should leave. Now." Brenda's eyes widened in disbelief. "Joey, you can't mean that, after everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done?" Joe's voice rose. "You've lied, manipulated, and abused the woman I love. Get out of our house, now." For a moment, Brenda looked like she might argue further. Then, with a final venomous glare at me, she turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Cliff cleared his throat, looking years older than he had an hour ago. "Lily, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do." I held up a hand, suddenly exhausted. "Thank you, Cliff, but right now, I think I need some time." As Cliff and Abigail prepared to leave, Joe turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Lily, please, can we talk?" I looked at him, this man I'd loved enough to sacrifice everything for. Could I forgive him for being so blind? Could we rebuild what Brenda had so systematically destroyed? "I don't know, Joe," I said honestly. "I need time to think, to figure out who I am without Brenda's shadow looming over me." Joe nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand. But please, don't give up on us. I love you, Lily. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." As I watched him walk away, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The truth was finally out, Brenda's reign of terror over. But the cost had been high. Could I reclaim the pieces of my shattered life? And more importantly, did I want to? I turned to Abigail, who had become an unexpected ally in this storm. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You heal, Dr. Hartley, and then you decide what kind of life you want to build from the ashes of the old one." As I stood there on the precipice of an uncertain future, I realized that for the first time in months I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. 6 months after Brenda's dramatic exit from our lives, I stood outside the hospital, my heart racing. Today marked my return to the ER, a day I'd both longed for and feared. "You've got this, Dr. Hartley," Abigail's voice came from beside me. Our unexpected friendship had become my anchor during the tumultuous months of healing and self-discovery. I took a deep breath and stepped through the doors, the familiar antiseptic smell washing over me. As I made my way to the locker room, I caught sight of my reflection. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who'd left this hospital over a year ago. Stronger, wiser, with a glint of hard-won confidence in her eyes. My first shift was a whirlwind of activity. As I treated patients, my hands moving with practiced skill, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. This was where I belonged. During a rare quiet moment, I stepped out for some air. To my surprise, Joe was waiting by the entrance, a bouquet of flowers in his hand. "I wanted to be here for your first day back," he said, his voice tinged with hope and uncertainty. Over the past months, we'd been slowly rebuilding our relationship, attending couples therapy, and having long, honest conversations. It hadn't been easy, but we were both committed to making it work. "Thank you," I said, accepting the flowers. "It means a lot that you're here." Just then my pager went off. "I have to go," I said apologetically. Joe nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Go save lives, Dr. Hartley. I'll be here when you're done." As I rushed back inside, I felt a surge of gratitude for how far we'd come. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of emergencies and quick decisions. As I was preparing to leave, a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. My blood ran cold as I recognized the voice. Brenda. She was being wheeled in on a gurney, clearly in distress. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. In that instant, I had a choice to make. I could walk away, let someone else handle her case. After all she'd put me through, no one would blame me. But as I looked at her, vulnerable and afraid, I remembered why I became a doctor in the first place. To help people, regardless of who they were or what they'd done. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward. "I'll take this one," I said to the surprised nurse. As I began examining Brenda, her eyes widened with recognition and, was that shame? "Lily," she whispered, "I don't deserve your help." I met her gaze steadily. "You're my patient, Brenda. That's all that matters right now." Over the next few hours, I worked tirelessly to stabilize Brenda's condition. It turned out to be a severe panic attack, brought on by the stress of her isolation and the weight of her actions. As she recovered, Brenda looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Lily, for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I regret what I did to you." I nodded, feeling a weight I didn't know I was carrying lift from my shoulders. "Thank you for saying that, Brenda. It means a lot." As I left her room, I found Joe waiting outside. He pulled me into a tight embrace. "I saw what you did in there," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're incredible, Lily. I'm so proud of you." In that moment, surrounded by the bustle of the hospital, held in the arms of the man I loved, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me here, back to myself, stronger and more resilient than ever. As we walked out of the hospital hand in hand, I realized that this wasn't just an ending, but a new beginning. I had reclaimed my career, my self-respect, and my voice, and I vowed never to let anyone silence me again. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities. There would be challenges, of course, but I was ready to face them head-on, because now I knew my own strength, and I had a support system that wouldn't let me fall. As the sun set on my first day back, I smiled, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. The road ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear: Dr. Lily Hartley was back, and she was here to stay.